webinar. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar that is being hosted by the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Presidential Center for Women's Development and Make Every Woman Count and Akina Mama Afrika. We are so pleased and delighted to see you all join this afternoon, this morning, depending on where you're joining from. We look forward to having an enriching conversation, and we have on this call the conveners who are going to be sharing different aspects that I will introduce shortly, but then we also have panelists who are here as catalysts for the conversation. And most importantly, we have you all, our attendees, our participants, that have been so kind and gracious enough to join us this afternoon, this morning. So please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're from, where you're joining from, and if any affiliation, please also share that. And we look forward to a very enriching conversation. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes, just giving a bit of time for others to join, and then we'll be good to start. Thank you very much.
Eunice, could you please tell them to add Naomi and Grace as a panelist, please? Thank you.
I got it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me. We are now going to start. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on Gap Zero consultation, closing the gap on women's leadership in public, closing the gap for women in public leadership. We are very delighted to host you this morning, this afternoon, and we look forward to an enriching conversation. So we have a simple program. I'm going to welcome you, and that's my job as the moderator. Then we shall hear from Christopher from the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Presidential Center, who will speak to us about why we are having this consultation. Thereafter, we'll have Naomi make a brief presentation on the state of women's leadership in Africa. And after that, we'll open it up to a distinguished panel of 3 with representatives from Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, but as well in different categories. One is a former woman MP, one is an academic, and one is a civil society actor. And therefore, they'll be bringing on board different perspectives from their standpoint. But most importantly, we also have you, our attendees, our participants, that we look forward to hearing your own insights, your perspectives, and together we believe that we'll be able to shape the Gap Zero Manifesto, but more importantly, to accelerate progress towards women's leadership, especially in public leadership. So delighted to be your moderator this afternoon. So without much ado, I'm going to say a thing or two and then invite Chris. So as the co-conveners of this conversation, we're really excited about this series that we are hosting. We plan to host 5 of them, so in different regions. So this is the first one that we are hosting, and it's targeting actors from East Africa. And we really look forward to ensuring that we capture those dynamics and nuances of our East African context in terms of women's leadership. And we'll be having others that will target West Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa, and North Africa. The purpose is to ensure that all the regional contexts are well captured as we shape together a collective that is going to inform and shape acceleration of women's substantive leadership, especially for women in public leadership. So with that, I will now invite Chris from Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Presidential Center to say a few words. Chris, I hope you're able to.
Yes. Eunice,
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can perfectly.
Okay, thank you so much, Eunice. And good morning, good afternoon to everyone that's on this call, colleagues, partners, friends of the co-conveners for this conversation. And it's a pleasure to join Eunice in welcoming you all to what is an important conversation. And as Eunice pointed out, the first in a series of regional consultations towards the development of what we are viewing as a Gap Zero Manifesto on gender equality in public leadership. So on behalf of the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Center, Akina Mama wa Afrika, Make Every Woman Count, we thank you for being here. And most importantly, really just lending your voices to what we believe is a collective effort. The purpose of our gathering today is really clear in my view, which is really to shape what we're viewing as a manifesto that will stand as a guiding framework for accelerating women's leadership across Africa. But before we look ahead, let's maybe reflect on why we believe such a manifesto is needed. Across our continent, there's no shortage of brilliant, ambitious, capable women who are ready to lead. And many a times we hear of these stories, we meet these women on this call and many of such women. But yet far too many, the path to public office or other leadership roles remains an uphill climb. And I'm sure some of those stories we will hear over the course of our conversation today. But women who aspire to serve are often confronted with barriers that their male counterparts seldom face. A lack of mentors and networks to pull them up, in some cases, fear of reputational damage, threats to personal and family security, and systemic structures that are designed really to exclude rather than to include. Staying standing, let alone advancing, is hard, and these are stories that for the work that we do at the center, we hear quite a bit of. At the center, we know these realities because we work directly with women who are navigating them every day. Our mission since our founding in 2018 has really been to serve as a catalyst for political and social change by unleashing Africa's most abundant, but yet most underutilized power, which is its women. Through our three major pillars of work: supporting women on the path to public office, dismantling barriers to leadership, and preserving and telling the stories of women public leaders, we are committed to creating an Africa where women's leadership is no longer an exception, but really is the norm, we have oftentimes heard. We view this Gap Zero Manifesto as a natural extension of this mission. In our conversations internally, just as the UN's Sustainable Development Goals set a global framework for progress across the globe, the Gap Zero Manifesto, we're hoping, seeks to establish Africa's own guiding framework for gender parity in leadership. It will define the commitments that we need from governments, political parties, civil society, development partners, to eliminate these disparities that we speak of and build true inclusive governance that we all aspire to. So this is why these consultations matter so deeply. They are not just technical exercises, they're opportunities for us to listen, to learn, and to lead together. So from this East African consultation and from the others that will follow subsequently, we will be collecting and hearing the lived experiences of our women leaders across the continent. We'll be identifying the unique and shared barriers that persist and craft actionable solutions rooted in Africa's own realities and your realities as well. The result will not only be what we're calling a manifesto, but also a unified advocacy agenda, which I think is most important, one that can be carried forward across the continent and hopefully beyond. So today, I invite all of us who are on this webinar to be bold, for us to draw from each other's rich history of feminist organizing, of women's leadership, most particularly in the region of Eastern Africa, and to share openly and challenge some of the assumptions we come onto this call with, and to imagine what is possible when women's leadership is fully recognized as essential to our development and to our future. So again, together, we're not just drafting a document, we're trying to shape a vision, build a movement, and chart a pathway to Gap Zero, which is a future where there are no gaps, there are no excuses, but there are also no limits on women's place in public leadership and in our society. So again, thank you all for joining. I look forward to our conversation this afternoon over the next couple of hours, and I look forward to the insights that will emerge from our deliberations today. So thanks once again, and Eunice, I hand back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris, for that elaboration of what Gap Zero is. It's always refreshing listening to the visioning that went into this process that is going to help us shape not just a campus, not just a compact, not just a connection point, but something that is going to uplift the status of women in Africa. So we are really excited about this process, even just coming together as three organizations to co-convene this, already speaking to building that movement, as you have said. So thank you very much. I will now invite Naomi, who is going to give us a snapshot of the status of women in Africa, so that it can set a good stage for the panelists to come in with their own insights and perspectives. And of course, with that snapshot, it will be good for us to identify what is already working, that needs to be scaled up. So we're really looking forward to that snapshot. Naomi, I hope that you have been enabled to present. So looking forward to
I
that.
can't Sorry, Naomi is still not added as a panelist. She won't be able to speak. I think I've been sending message around, but is the tech person could help to add Naomi, please, as a panelist? Stella?
Mubezi?
Let me find Naomi.
Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe, Rai, you could be introducing the presentation as Naomi is uplifted.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending where you are. My name is Raina Tuso, and I'm the ED of Make and Run Count. So it's a great pleasure to be working with the Center, but also Akina Mama on this amazing initiative. And just to cut it short, the idea when we started designing this, we really wanted to, first of all, start having that raw data, which means talking with few people, interview, but also we thought it would be really important to do some desk review to understand the data that is out there at the regional level, but also at the continental level. So we did, as a first step, we did this report that gave us an overview of women political participation across the continent. This is done regionally. So we did for East, Southern, West, and Central Africa, and North Africa. And we did this by really giving us the data in terms of the trend of women in parliament, the percentage, women ministers, but also what are the strategies that have been used, what are the challenges and the opportunity moving forward. So we for as part of this consultation, that is really important to share with you some of the key findings of this report, really to help us to kind of tease out the conversation, and that would help us to, after the panelists, but also when we open up the conversation to the participants, so you could have an understanding where we are at and what is happening at the continental, but most importantly in East Africa. I think my colleague Naomi is ready to provide you this really short 10 minutes presentation of some of the key findings of women political participation in East Africa. Thank you. Naomi, back to you.
Thanks, Rai. Thank you, everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Naomi Ndufon. I'm from Nigeria. I'm with the Make Everyone Count team as a communications and advocacy officer. And I'll be sharing some insights from our key findings from our presentation. Just very quickly, I would like to share my screen if that would be possible, but if not, I can go ahead, Amwa.
It would be better if you could share. I don't know if Stella, could you help Naomi to share her screen, please? Thank you.
Stella, are you able to help Naomi?
Just a minute, kindly bear with me.
All right.
Okay.
Naomi, you could start as they try to fix the screen.
Okay. All right, no problem. Thank you, everyone. So we're just going to be sharing what we found from our preliminary desk research on women's political participation in East Africa, where we try to explore the varying levels of women's representation in parliaments and cabinets across the region, and what were the common strategies that we use to enhance gender parity, what were the persisting challenges and barriers that we are seeing across these countries and across their different social political structures, and what are the opportunities still that we are seeing that are helping some countries that could be also just replicated in other countries as well. So in terms of a parliamentary representation, the highest is Rwanda. Rwanda stands out as a global leader for women's representation at 61%, but we're also seeing representation as low as 13% in Madagascar. And then right in the middle, we're having Tanzania Uganda, Ethiopia, ranging between the 30s and 41%, which is showing that they are making efforts and they are growing progressively over the years as well. But at the top of women's proportion, women's representation in parliament, we have Rwanda leading, then followed by Ethiopia, and then the other countries. Um, Ethiopia has made significant progress in their House of the People's Representatives recently, but we're also seeing that in a country like Seychelles, there's been a decrease in women parliamentarians from 2020 up until now. In 2015, initially it was about 43.8%, and then now in 2020 it was 24.2%, and then now, sorry, in 2025, as at April 2025, it was 28.6%, and that has been due to some list-based adjustments that have been going on recently. So basically, it's been a range in the region. There's a range from 61% in Rwanda, and at the lowest, we're seeing Madagascar at 13.8%. This is data that is based off our desk review from the Interparliamentary Union data. Sudan and Eritrea were not considered in this review because due to the conflict in Sudan, it was suspended, and then Eritrea as well has not had legislative elections for a long time. So those were excluded from the review of the percentage of women in parliament. For women having ministerial positions, in contrast to how it was in parliament, where women were able to where in Rwanda is leading in parliament. We're seeing that in ministerial positions, Ethiopia is leading in ministerial positions at 45.5%. Then we now come down to countries like Kenya and Uganda at 30%, even Tanzania at 28%, before you see Rwanda at 26.3%. And this is just based off data from the World Bank's gender data portal, where we are seeing these variations in women's ministerial positions. But the most interesting things are what were the things that we're seeing that are sort of helping countries like Ethiopia, Rwanda come out on top. And three things have really stood out from our review. One is quota systems, the other is party incentives, and the third is grassroots mobilizations. So legislative quotas have been most effective
Naomi,
in
could you try again if you could share? I think they have given you the access, I believe.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Yes, I can. Just give me a minute. Let me know when you can you can see my screen.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Yes. So can you all hear and see my screen? Just to confirm.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So this was this was the data I shared earlier about the proportion of women in parliament in East Africa. We can see Rwanda on top and then Madagascar with 13.8%. For ministerial positions, we can see that Ethiopia is on top, followed by countries like Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania, even before you see Rwanda this time around for ministerial positions. But in terms of the strategies that are helping in gender parity, we're having quota systems, party incentives, and grassroots mobilization as the key strategies that are helping countries like Ethiopia and Rwanda really come out on top. So legislative quotas have been very effective in boosting women's representation. So, for example, is Rwanda has a 30% threshold that's enshrined in its constitution, and that has been very helpful in just pushing for more women, having more women in parliament in Rwanda. Ethiopia has an alternative model, which is a voluntary party quota, and we're seeing parties like the EPRF and the Prosperity Party adopting this quota adopting this voluntary quota, making it like a 30% quota as well. And in some elections, they've even exceeded that quota. So that's been very helpful in helping those two countries really push for more gender parity. Also, party incentives like linking public funding to parties' gender inclusion has been significant in Ethiopia. Ethiopia has since 2008, there's a system where political parties can get an additional flat rate of funding for the number of women candidates that they nominated in their candidate list. And this provides a very powerful financial incentive to promote parties to have more female candidates and nominate more women into their list. Similarly, another strategy is grassroots mobilization. So we know that women's collectives and advocacy, just like what we are doing in this meeting today, is really at the heart of pushing for greater women's political participation. And they amplify women's voices, but they also increase accountability for gender parity. Good examples we're seeing have been in Sudan during the 2018 to 2019 revolution. Um, the voices and those women who really came up, they helped in changing the perception of what women's leadership could be like. In Kenya as well, organizations like FIDA Kenya have also been very instrumental in creating innovative legal strategies to hold governments accountable and make gender provisions to increase parity in their country. But we're also still seeing that a lot of challenges and gaps persist, and there are different categories of these challenges. One category is enforcement challenges, where there's a lack of enforcement mechanisms, or there are enforcement mechanisms, but there are weak accountability, and there may be systems where there's perceived hierarchy. So some countries have quotas in law, but they lack, effective enforcement mechanisms like sanctions. Some countries, for example, we've seen this in Mauritius and Seychelles, where even though they had voluntary quotas, there were poor monitoring regimes, and that meant that even the voluntary quotas were not enough in really boosting women's representation. So it ended up yielding very small increases in women's representation. So that weak accountability, it meant that quotas alone couldn't help with that. They needed to be complemented with stronger accountability mechanisms. In some countries that have adopted like reserved seat quotas, women in these seats are sometimes perceived as having less political influence, and so there's a sense of them being somewhat like a diversity hire, and that authority, they don't seem to be perceived with having a significant authority as their counterparts who came in through open constituencies. There are also barriers around like social cultural barriers where there's a burden placed on women to drive systemic change rather than as a collective, and this is a sentiment that's been reflected even by President Samia Suluhu of Tanzania. There's a barrier of tokenism, and where there's a burden of expectation on the few female leaders who are elected or brought into these positions. There are also the persistent traditional and religious norms where discriminatory gender roles are reinforced, and it maintains marginalization of women in politics. And then even for the few women leaders who occupy some of these seats in parliament or in cabinet, there's a constant evaluation of their credentials, and they're expected to conform to cultural expectations of them being nurturers or caretakers or homemakers. And then another challenge that we're seeing is around gender-based violence and harassment, and just the general global backlash that all of us can attribute and attest to. It also presents a significant barrier for women's political participation in East Africa. Women candidates and even sitting MPs have faced threats, physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, cyberbullying, intimidation, both overtly, or both in online spaces. And these experiences, they not only hurt these women, but they also discourage younger women from wanting to participate and go into politics, and it signals an institutional failure to protect women's political rights. Another challenge is financial constraints. So there's unequal access to party funding. So many women candidates are usually self-funded. They don't receive as much funding as their male counterparts, and so they can't run effective campaigns. There's also a lack of, with the exception of Ethiopia, that has the financial incentivization model. There's many countries in the East Africa region, they lack mechanisms to tie public funding to gender inclusive candidate lists. Again, a lot of women candidates are forced to self-finance their campaigns. Similarly, as well, we have seen that donors, both individual donors and institutional donors, they tend to disproportionately contribute to male counterparts. So this sort of perpetuates the financial disparities that we are seeing faced by women. And lastly, conflict and instability is a major barrier, particularly in countries like Sudan and Somalia, where there's fragile political transitions, and they're in conflict zones. So this instability has disrupted democratic processes. In Ethiopia, for example, there was a gender balance cabinet in 2018, but when a political upheaval took hold, women's representation receded a lot. So it shows the vulnerability of women's leadership positions to moments of political instability. And this also just shows largely to the lack of institutional safeguards. So when there are no institutional frameworks to protect and entrench gender parities in these situations of conflict and instability, hard-won advances like we're seeing in Ethiopia in 2018, they remain vulnerable to backsliding and recession during these periods. And so, in spite of all of these challenges and barriers, there are lots of emerging opportunities that we're seeing in some regions in some countries that can be adapted to other countries across the region. One of that is, linking public funding to gender representation, like the model that's being used in Ethiopia, tying state support to women's participation in politics to sort of incentivize parties to prioritize women as candidates, as members, as leaders, also leveraging post-conflict transition. So capitalizing on institutional rebuilding, we've seen that be successful in Rwanda and Burundi. Capitalizing on those moments after crisis to push for the embedding of quotas, embedding of these policies that can help in pushing for greater women's political participation, and then also just strengthening women's caucuses and networks. So, for example, I think the Women's Parliamentary Forum in Rwanda. It was established in the 90s, but it's still a source of peer mentorship and has still been very helpful in pushing for greater women's political participation. So strengthening those caucuses, making sure that those cross-party forums, they can be used to foster policy influence and advocacy. And then finally, harnessing digital and grassroots movements. Online platforms are a new avenue for us to ensure that we not only support female candidates, but also they can engage directly with voters because they bypass these patriarchal structures that prevent them from doing so in more physical spaces. And we're also able to amplify women's collectives at the local level at the same time. So these are some of the opportunities that we've seen from our review and the challenges, but I'm very excited to hear some of the thoughts that our panelists will have to share. And thank you so much for listening and for this presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Naomi, for that very comprehensive presentation and for Make Every Woman Count, for really doing a thorough job of the desk review and enabling us to see the differences in the different contexts. It's very nice to see where there's progress and areas for improvement, but most importantly, what's working and what needs to work better. And so without much ado, I'm now going to bring on board our panelists who are going to help us to dig deeper into this presentation that you've just shared, Naomi. And we have this afternoon a distinguished panel of 3 actors. We have Honorable Nyokabi, who is a former member of parliament, Nyeri country in Kenya, and therefore she will be giving us a very good nuance of what it means to be a female leader and the obstacles she had to overcome and be able to succeed. And so her story is also the story of many. So we are glad that we shall be having that perspective. And then we shall have Dr. Victoria, who is going to be sharing with us from an academic's perspective as someone who has spent most of her life studying this subject, pushing for gender quotas, and really trying to see what works and what doesn't work. So bringing the theory and the practice together. So we'll be also listening to Dr. Victoria. And then we shall have Georgia, who share from a practitioner's perspective. I like what you said, Naomi, grassroots mobilization. So Georgia is the Women's Political Leadership Program Manager, and for a long time has continued to equip women in leadership with the skills, the knowledge, and the practicals of how you can navigate the political landscape. So we believe that those three perspectives will act as good catalysts for us to come up with what Chris urged us to do, bold, transformative recommendations that will shape and inform the Gap Zero Manifesto this afternoon. So I'm now going to start off the conversation with Honorable Nyokabi. Please introduce yourself more distinguishedly than I have, and share with us from your perspective, what is it that is happening in terms of women's leadership? We're interested to know the nuance of Kenya, for example, the 2/3 gender rule that has become like the holy grail, very hard to nail, but then also your reflections on what is it that needs to happen to accelerate the progress that we are seeking. Honorable, you're welcome.
Thank you. So I could just proceed?
Yes, please.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the invitation, also from Michelle. And thank you for the presentations done earlier and the challenges identified, some of which resonate very closely to Kenyan situation. So I just want to go to the first question on the barriers and barriers to women political leadership, especially just drawn from my own experience, and just point out 5 that I had already summarized here. One is culture and patriarchy. We still have a big problem around culture and patriarchy for participation of women in politics and in leadership. And it is so strong, especially when you go for competitive seats. If you go for gubernatorial or senatorial or member of parliament, it's almost like women are only being left for the special quota seats. Like in Kenya, we have the women representative seat. That seems to be the only seat after, some men even wanted to vie for it actually. Thank God it is properly written in the Constitution. So there was no chance for men vying for it, one in every county. But other than that seat, so if you go on for very competitive seats, there's a big problem around culture and patriarchy, and some regions are yet to elect women. It's changing, but that still remains a big problem. And that comes with GBV and the gender roles that have been spoken about, that they think that the questions about your marriage, do you vie in your constituency of birth, in your constituency of marriage, both ways you are in trouble. If you are single, you are in trouble. If you are divorced, you are in trouble. If you are married and not vying where you are married, you are in trouble. In fact, there is even it's like there is no clear clarity for women. If you vie where you were born, they say you've come back and you're married. If you vie where you are married, they call you a foreigner. So a whole lot of patriarchal issues and family-based kind of things. And then the GBV, the gender-based violence, is still quite heavy. And so that in terms of the solutions that we are thinking about, one is going to be security for candidates, security for women candidates. I think that in Africa now, we have to address the question of security, especially for some of the larger positions, gubernatorial or even presidential and deputy presidential positions. Where is the security for women who are vying? Where is the security for the family? And where is the technology and the cyberbullying that comes with it? Where is the security for it? The other big barrier is finances. Unfortunately, and I think sadly for Africa and maybe for Kenya as well, our elections are becoming very expensive. It's an extremely expensive affair, and you have to do the party primaries, which are a very expensive affair, and then you have to go on to the main election. And so we need to worry about the question of finances. And one way is electoral campaign financing laws. They have to work for us to be able to access the playing field. We are never going to beat men on financial muscle. If it becomes financial muscle, then women candidates are already shortchanged. What will help us in Africa is campaign financing laws. There must be acceptable spending, so that is not bribery, is not corruption, is not voter buying. It is actually logistics, it is travel, it is publicity, it is branding. And so therefore, organizations that support women are going to have to support women, for example, on publicity and branding. In Kenya, we have the language of the horses for the main candidates, the donkeys for the second tier of candidates, and then I think the rabbits. And women are always in the rabbit category. So when you enter the race, the horses are racing at the front there, the donkeys are following, and then the women are in the other candidates. And we can't get to the media and publicity and branding, and all that is important and is related to financing and campaign financing in particular. The third is legal, the legal questions. Our elections are very, very legalese. They are, I think, in an effort to run away from bribery and voter rigging and all that, we made our elections very legalese and very strong legal standards and legal norms and strategies. So again, how do women navigate that whole legal sphere? The electoral management bodies, where is the gender considerations for women candidates, but also special interest candidates, the youthful candidates, the persons with disability, the charges. In fact, some of the party charges are also very hefty. Where are the affirmative action measures within the legal systems and the electoral management systems? There just must be affirmative action embedded therein. And then we have the strategy challenges and networks. Again, women, this is a new field for us. Men have been vying for the last 60 years of our independence. So just navigating the strategies, navigating the networks. The other big one is political parties. Our political parties are still male-led. They are still male-owned, male-led, male spaces. And so women in political parties are not getting sufficient space to sit at the management bodies, at the management levels. And even when there is a meeting in a political party, another meeting will be held where the women are not. And the meeting where the women are, the decisions are not made. Decisions are made when the women have left. So these political parties face coalitions. Parties are already problematic, but when it goes to coalitions, it gets even worse for women candidates. So again, the level of political parties, the 2/3 gender rule at the political party, or the quota systems, and I like that the quotas came up in the earlier presentation. Quotas in political parties. We are now doing a little better with quotas in the electoral system. But what about quotas in the political party? Especially when we go on to negotiated democracy at the party level, where the party ticket is negotiated. Where are the quotas so that some of those negotiations can then favor women candidates? And especially for the big parties, we must make sure that, for example, Kenya, where we have the 2/3 gender rule, 2/3 of the women candidates, or 2/3 of the candidates of a party are women. The quota system must be respected at the party level. Once we lose it at the party level, the other election is, we can't recover it at that level. And that's sort of what you see with the ANC, with the party list system. So the party system and the quotas must now be at the party level. And not exactly voluntary, because now parties are the vehicles to power. They must now be legal standards. They must be legal norms. They must be legal protected, so that the electoral management body can enforce that the party is meeting the quota system. And then we have something we are calling the opposite gender rule, where if the presidential candidate is male, the deputy presidential candidate or the vice president should be female. Every man should now vie with a woman. Since we are 50% of the population, it should now be mandatory, even at the local government level. The governor should vie with an opposite gender candidate, so that you have women starting off at the deputy level. And it is true there is a deputy syndrome for women, but let us first be the deputy. And then, like in Ghana, where we now have the deputy president as a woman, then we will worry about how to counter the deputy presidential syndrome. But then this question about the political party, that's a big one. Presidential candidates must be tied to this quota system for the women candidates. Then more and more role models, transformative women leadership. And I think this is also where we fail. I've been in the women rights movement for long. Post-election, after the women have been elected, where is their performance? Where is their delivery? Where is their capacity building? In Kenya now, we've sent a lot of women to the county assemblies. We've sent women to the National Assembly, to the Senate. But my good Lord, it is now drama. It is dramatic. When they get there, we didn't give them the skills of how we sent women to boys' schools. Then when they get to the boys' school, they now don't know how to behave. And they embarrass all of us. Now all of us cannot be elected in the next election because the ones we sent haven't even performed anyway. So post-election, what do we do to women in office? How do we make sure that they are transformative women leaders? They are politically branded. Their programs are being seen. We had the 7 women governors elected in Kenya, and that's the G7 program that I shaped the strategy for. Now they are already G6. One woman has been impeached already. But this G6, the ones who are remaining, where is their performance? Because if the 6 don't perform, There is no chance that women will elect other women, or the society will elect more women in the next coming election. So post-election, Akina Mama and Ellen Johnson Center, where are we to strengthen the women in office, to make sure that they don't lose the offices? I've told you in Kenya, we've already lost one. And people are even saying by the time of the election, there will be G3. And we have actually had an election where no woman was elected, G0. Now we have G7. How do we make sure we move from 7 to 16, which is the 2/3 number? Where is the support for those who are already in office to retain the seats that they have? Thank you so much. Let me speak to those barriers for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Nyokabi. Definitely you speak with so much passion and so much experience and so much knowledge. I am here laughing at the G0, G7 comes down to G6. We can never win, but you do make very important points about the support for those that have managed to access, the support for those that need to access, and the support that for those that are thinking of accessing. So thank you for giving us all those different nuances that we need to be aware of. Thank you very much. I'm now going to pivot to Dr. Victoria, who is also going to share from her perspective as an academic. Dr. Victoria. And Dr. Victoria is from Tanzania. Tanzania is right in the hot seat of elections this year, so I'm sure that's also another dynamic to women's leadership. Dr. Victoria, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. It's such a critical conversation happening at this time, and particularly in East Africa, where we're going to have elections. You know, this year is Tanzania. I hope next year is Uganda, I think. And also next year, 2027, is going to be Kenya. So it's such a pivotal conversation and discussion. So for the past 14, 15 years, I've been studying the subject of women's political participation, particularly the legal framework, because I am coming from the law background. And there are a number of legal challenges that face women's political participation. But when it comes to this conversation, I'm going to highlight on the gender quotas, but also some of the very systemic challenges facing women participation in electoral politics here in East Africa. So actually, almost amongst the 8 countries that form East Africa, which is Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, Uganda, South Sudan, Kenya, Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Somalia. All of these have some form of a quota. So for instance, in Rwanda, they have 2 ways where they apply the quota. The first procedure is that in each party list, there has to be 30% of women. So the previous speaker talked about how we need to bring the gender quotas into the party list, not necessarily just after the elections, but ensuring that actually within the party list you have the share of women. So Rwanda has this, and any political party contesting for parliamentary elections, they have to ensure that 30% of the party list is comprising of women. But they also have another way where 24 seats in the parliament is reserved for women, and these are elected through the Women Council. So Rwanda applies what we call proportional representation electoral system. And this is different from other East African countries that apply first past the post. So with proportional representation, it's where you can apply the threshold into the party's candidate list. It's easier to apply the gender threshold through the proportional representation compared to how it is in the first past the post electoral system. So Rwanda has 2 ways. They have a fixed number, that 24 women have to be elected through the women councils, but they also have a mandatory 30% gender quota for each. To Burundi, they also have the constitution mandates for 30% gender quota in parliament and in government. And also, just to go back to Rwanda, the 30% gender...
Apologies, Dr. Victoria. Some of the participants are having trouble hearing you. I don't know whether you can move closer to your mic or something. Or you could actually switch off the video so that we can hear you much better than yes. You're a bit far off from the mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's
Okay.
much better.
Okay, so I was now at Burundi, where according to the constitution, Burundi also applies proportional representation, and the 30% of the party list need to comprise of women. So as I said prior, it's very easy to integrate gender quota into the party list in a country that applies proportional representation as the electoral system, compared to where the country applies first past the post, just like it is the case in Kenya and in Tanzania. So coming to Tanzania, we also use first past the post, and our constitution reserve minimum of 30% reserved seats. These are reserved seats. So this is different from Burundi and Rwanda, where the 30% gender quota is supposed to be embedded into the party list. So this means that in Burundi and in Rwanda, women are submitted by their political parties and they form part of the candidate list who are voted for. And when the votes are counted and they are translated into seats, then you find women already in the list of those who have won the elections. So this is different from Tanzania, where we do the elections first, and then depending on the percent of votes that a political party has obtained, then they get an additional share of women that they need to bring. So these women have not gone through the ordinary or the traditional competition within the constituency. But each political party has its own mechanism of getting these women, nominating these women. And this actually has opened window for most of the allegations, especially on how these women are obtained. The allegations of corruption, nepotism, incompetency, because there is no known procedure that universally or that generally guide all the political parties in terms of how they can nominate these women. And by the way, these women, according to international law principles, whenever you have what we call temporary special measures, these measures or these women who are coming into the position of power through temporary special measures, they need to have what we call electability status. They need to be elected so that they have equal status with other members of parliament who are also coming through the competitive seats. So how the temporary special measures in form of special seats is applied in Tanzania is, to my opinion, contrary to the practice under international law, which requires these women to have electability status, because the women who are coming through this system are not voted for by the citizens. Some of the political parties have very well established mechanisms for getting these women, such as the ruling party, Chama cha Mapinduzi, but these women are still voted by by the women wing. So it is the women wing of the party that oversees the process of obtaining these women, and eventually they vote amongst themselves and they obtain women to vie or to become special seat members of parliament. So they don't have electability status, they don't have a constituency, they don't have geographical representation, and when they go to the parliament, they get this, what I call second citizen treatment or second member of parliament treatment. Because they are entitlement that the members of parliament who are coming into the parliament through competitive politics are getting, that the women who are coming from special seats, they are not getting, particularly what we call constituency development fund. So that constituency development fund is only members of parliament who win competitively are qualified to get such, but women special seats are deemed not to represent a constituency, and therefore they are not entitled to a constituency fund, which is very discriminatory because representing women are in itself a constituency. So actually mistaking a constituency to a geographical location, I think it is going against the whole idea of affirmative action. And also these women are not qualified to become prime ministers. So no matter how competent you can be, when we are nominating a person for a prime minister position, they have to come from a constituency, and these women are deemed not to have constituencies. There are very many challenges facing this reserved seat system, but it has really helped in another looking at the positive side of it. It has helped because most of the prominent women politicians we have at the moment have emerged from the special seat system, including the president. She started as a special seat member of parliament, and then she transitioned into a competitive seat and all the way into ministerial positions, and now she is the president, and today she's launching her campaign to seek for the second term. Yes, and when it comes to before I go to South Sudan, maybe go to Uganda, and here they also have a quota system, what we call one woman MP per district. So this is what is happening in Uganda. But apart from Tanzania, where these women are nominated by their political parties, the women in Uganda are voted for in their respective districts, and that gives them what I mentioned prior, electability status. So whenever people are pushing for an adoption of a quota system, particularly in countries such as when you go to Southern Africa, you will hear that in countries such as Malawi and Zambia, they do not have any quota system. Women compete just like any other person. So these countries are now looking into adopting, a favorable quota system. They should ensure that into their advocacy, they get a system that gives these women electability status, because if they're not elected, they miss out on a lot of things, and they end up being named as, eaters of taxpayers' money because citizens have not voted for them. They don't feel like they're connected to them, and they end up missing out on many other entitlements and many other opportunities that they could use to bring change to the female constituency. So South Sudan, the 2018 revitalized peace agreement mandates 35% women representation in executive and legislative bodies. But again, as you know how unstable South Sudan is, and whenever the country is unstable, women's representation suffer the most. They suffer from how they represent into the peace processes. They also suffer in terms of how they are in the positions of power. In Kenya, the famous 2/3 rule, which we are always making reference to, saying whenever you want to adopt a quota system, you need to ensure that the language that prescribes the quota system is as direct and capable of implementing that provision, because now it has become very challenging in terms of unpacking this provision and operationalizing it. There have been cases, there have been declarations to dissolve the parliament, but up and until now, the 2/3 gender rule has not been implemented 15 years after the fact. And we see here, we don't know what to do to push. And but again, I think the 47 county women representatives is helping a lot in terms of giving women visibility. But when it comes to constituencies, as the previous speaker has told us, only 7 women, now G6. So it's quite a challenge. When it comes to Democratic Republic of the Congo, the constitution doesn't put a specific number as a quota, it just says gender parity. And it encourages inclusion of women candidates into the political parties processes. But again, when you say a political party need to take deliberate effort to attain equity or parity without putting a number, when it comes to a push for women's political representation, we are looking at two things. We are looking at the number, so it has to be explicitly stated. If it's 30%, if it's 50%, it has to be specifically stated, and then we come to quality in terms of substantive representation. So because of that vagueness in that particular provision, then you only have 11% of women in parliament in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And finally, when it comes to Somalia, you also have a political agreement that allocates 30% of parliamentary seats to women. But this is not enshrined into the law. And as you know, Somalia is very much clan-based. There's so much clan-based politics. So seats are filled through clan negotiations. And now actual representation remain around 19 to 20%. So what are the issues? Really, from a legal background, what I know and what I am sure would move a needle is, you have these international conventions, you have regional conventions, you have sub-regional conventions. So you have your ICCPR, you have your CEDAW, you have your, the Banjul Charter, Maputo Protocol, you have your SDGs, and you have CEDAW for elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. But my sense is that these tools or these instruments.
Doctor, I'm going to ask you to wrap up, please.
Yes. So, for instance, SADC protocol, it specifically mentions 50%. And we see most of the countries that are doing well in terms of women's political representation, apart from Rwanda, which is an outlier in East Africa, in the Southern Africa. You talk about South Africa, but that's all because of the ANC. And that's a challenge because it is a party decision. So it's not embedded into the national laws. So in case ANC loses the elections, then we will see a lot of drop down in terms of the number of the women. So what I'm trying to say is that the international conventions, the regional convention, the sub-regional convention, they have to also embed a specific number that the countries need to work into attaining, instead of just saying countries look towards achieving parity or equality. Of course, impliedly, equality or parity means 50-50, but we need to say 50-50, just like how it is stated into the SADC protocol. So you can't see the explicit number in other conventions, and it becomes very difficult to hold the countries accountable. And finally, I want to talk about electoral system. We may talk about quotas, we may talk about finances, we may talk about patriarchy, but my main challenge for low representation of women in positions of power is electoral system, because an electoral system provides for an arrangement about how we are going to conduct an election. So let's say countries that use proportional representation, you have your Rwanda, you have South Africa, you have Namibia. In this country, you have Senegal. These countries have highest number of women representation. Why? Because proportional representation as an electoral system provides for favorable conditions for not only women, but almost all of the groups in the community to participate fairly, compared to how competitive it is participating through first past the post. So my call is that whenever we are pushing for increased number of women in positions of power, let's try to dig deep into an electoral system. Let's advocate for changing electoral system, because it's up and until we change the electoral system, then we will just be talking about problems that are not real problems. We can address patriarchy, we can address money, we can address perceptions through an electoral system. If we design an electoral system that is accommodative of all groups of people, then we have, in a way, addressed all other challenges. And this will even work better for countries like Tanzania that don't have a private candidates. So in Tanzania, for instance, you cannot run as an independent candidate. So let's say you want to run, you have to run through a political party, and you are running through first past the post, which is very harsh. That will not give you leverage to win an election compared to if a country applies proportional representation that embed zebra system in terms of alternating names of men and women, and also having female as the first person to start the list. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Victoria. Very much appreciated from a scholar's perspective, from a research perspective. I was reading through most of the papers that you've written on the quota system, and it's clearly something that you're deeply theorized, and thank you for bringing that to this space and for the proposal on how we can move the needle in terms of women's representation. I like what you said. We need to be clear, we need to be explicit, we need to state it and not just rely on the goodwill of the party to ensure that women are in positions of leadership. So thank you very much for that very good, insightful take on this issue that we are discussing. And now I will pivot to Georgia Tumwesije, who is the Women's Political Leadership Program Manager at Forum for Women in Democracy. And this is an entity based in Uganda, but it does some regional work and for a long time has championed women's political leadership. And so, Georgia, similar to the previous panelists, can we have your perspectives and your take on the issue under discussion, especially from the standpoint of a civil society, women's rights, feminist actor? Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Eunice, and I'm very, very honored to be alongside such distinguished panelists. Now, at the Forum for Women in Democracy, since inception in 1995, we've moved countless women from the sidelines to the starting line. But as we all know, the race itself is very rigged. And so this afternoon or morning or night, wherever you are, I would like to focus on how, you know, the racetrack can be re-engineered. And so I'm going to move away from the usual rhetoric because yes, we know what works. We have been at it for years and somehow the status quo remains the same. You see, Eunice, tokenism isn't an accident. It is a system feature of patriarchy and it is sustained and has been sustained for so long. So to achieve real influence, we need to systemically dismantle the architecture of exclusion and build new structures of power altogether. So we need a system overhaul. And here's how I think we can do this. One is the structural power, parity with portfolio control. So we need to move from seat quotas to parity plus quotas. We are all over the world, women are more than 50% of the population. In many countries, a little over 50%. And so then how is it that the majority of the population can be the least represented in leadership? And so we need to move from the seat quotas to parity quotas, equal numbers and guaranteed leadership of policy relevant committees in finance, security, academia, the cabinet, and public service. You've seen from Naomi's presentation how Rwanda has over 60% women legislators, but when it came to women representation in ministerial level positions, did I say that it was under 30%? So, you know, this is something that we need to reflect on, and we can implement by legislating that all appointments to key committees must reflect gender parity, not 30%, not 40%, but 50-50. So we can actually also create an automatic co-chair rule where a male chair must have a woman co-chair in high impact committees. And then two, after having the gender parity, we need to mandate a power audit. We must move beyond counting women in rooms to auditing the power of the rooms they are in. You see, tokenism continues to breed a cadre of women leaders who are physically present, and in many instances, we have met the quota target, but we have women who continue to be physically present, strategically absent when it comes to real decision-making processes. So I propose that every government ministry, parliamentary committee, and corporate board undergoes an annual public gender audit, gender power audit. And this audit would help in analyzing, one, budget influence, who actually controls the purse strings, how much discretionary funding do women in leadership actually command? We need to audit the agenda setting power, whose policy proposals make it to the floor of parliament. We can track the percentage of bills initiated by women that actually receive serious debate and resourcing and not being called a women's issue like Naomi had presented earlier on. And then the committee chairpersons, not just membership. Chair roles control the agenda, the timeline, and the resources. That is why we need parity in these roles. The other thing we need to do is create feminist policy incubators and shadow structures. So instead of waiting for a seat at the old table, we need to build new powerful tables that the old system must eventually come to. The incubators, in this case, would establish well-funded cross-movement hubs, bringing together activists, economists, lawyers, and technocrats to draft, not just policy proposals, but fully costed, legally vetted, and publicly messaged feminist ready-to-govern bills on issues like care work, marriage, SRHR, land rights, climate justice, and so on. We would then hand this over to our allies in parliament to table immediately, but this would need very good feminist resourcing, core funding. And then the other, still under creating feminist policy incubators, is having shadow cabinets or committees. So we'd actually jointly form publicly recognized alternative bodies of women experts and leaders. And at the time the women's movement was growing in Africa, we had this, there was unity, Pan-African unity across countries. Right now we are a bit fragmented, but it is not too late, we can get back there. And so we would hold, public hearings, grassroots mobilization, release alternative budgets, what a feminist budget would look like, because I believe feminism is the antidote to gender inequality. And then we would provide real-time rebuttals and solutions, creating this constant, credible counter pressure that makes token appointments look weak. The other is pipeline plus placement, not just training. So at the Forum for Women in Democracy, since 2004, we've been building a pipeline of alternative and transformative leadership. I know that AMWA has even longer experience doing this sort of work, but we need to convert leadership training into guaranteed placement pathways. Things like internship, apprenticeship with ministers and MPs, pre-approved candidate lists for even by-elections. So we need to start influencing even these processes. So we would need to create a formal leadership to office pathways co-designed by universities, local councils, and civil society, alongside political parties with signed MOUs, so that beyond the training, we know that people are actually getting into these spaces. And then finally, about reducing or doing away with tokenism, we need to institutionalize the advisor mandate. Now, you will bear me witness that very many times often when we get a woman minister, they are surrounded by male advisors and technocrats. So policy is largely written by the advisors and technocrats. So we need to advocate for a policy that any woman appointed to a senior executive role must have the authority to appoint at least 50% of her own senior advisory staff. This would ensure that, she has a team that shares her mandate and can withstand institutional resistance, which is bound to happen. So I hope this would actually shift the focus from getting women into not just entering into these spaces, but that they have the tools, the allies, and the structural power to win. And then most interestingly, I was happy to hear about the Gap Zero Manifesto, and congratulations to everyone and the co-conveners of this event. So the Gap Zero Manifesto must be a bold, binding contract with the future. And I think it should even speak to a utopic feminist future. It must target the root causes and not just the symptoms. So I'm hoping to see these non-negotiable commitments in the Gap Zero Manifesto. One is the Care Infrastructure Pact. You cannot have a woman leader without a society that shares the burden of care. And so the manifesto must commit signatory nations and institutions to, one, invest in public care, a specific annual GDP allocation to build universal, affordable, quality child care centers, elder care, and community kitchens. We've seen it happen in some nations. And then the other is that we need to pass daddy quotas. So we need to legislate for non-transferable, fully paid paternity leave beyond the 4 or 3 days that are currently, given to new fathers. So if men are forced into care or to care, the care work will be valued and the career penalty for women will start to diminish. We know of institutions that, try not to hire women because of the paid maternity leave every other time. And so I believe this would be a game changer. Two is a Gender Equal Financing Act. So influence requires resources. Tokenism is cheap, but real power is actually funded. So we would continue with the public campaigns, but now have a public campaign financing. This is legislation that would mandate at least 50% of public campaign funds being allocated to women candidates and their parties based on their proportion of candidacies. This will also push the parties into having more women flag bearers at the national level. And then the other is actually regulating the party primaries. We need to outlaw discriminatory party nomination fees that require parties, and then require parties to use transparent, objective criteria for candidate selection with their books open to audit for gender parity in resourcing. The current ruling party in Uganda collected over 60 billion just last month and in the month before from just party nomination. To contest as president in the ruling party, you need to pay 20 million Uganda shillings. An MP that moved from 2 million to 3 million Uganda shillings. And as we know, poverty has the face of a woman. And then the other is feminist governance standard. I hope that the manifesto, and I'm concluding,
Okay.
yes, I am concluding. So I hope that the manifesto also has a feminist governance standard. So this would be a rigorous standard that parliaments, ministries, and local governments can work to achieve. It would measure everything from gender-responsive budgeting, sexual harassment policies, to the use of gender impact assessments for all legislation and the presence of lactation rooms and flexible working hours as well. So governments all over Africa would need to compete to be certified, creating a race to the top, where Rwanda proudly keeps saying, oh, we have 60% and we are a very unique parliament. And very, very finally, intergenerational mandates. We cannot emphasize this enough, but we need to constantly renew the pipeline of bold and value-driven leaders. Thank you very much, Eunice. In conclusion, we need to just redesign the entire system, and this requires creativity beyond courage. Thank you very much and have a lovely rest of the conversation.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much, Georgia. What a great way to end the panel conversation. Those were bold, transformative, fresh proposals. I think you should transfer them into a paper, Georgia. That could really go a long way. So thank you so much. And the Gap Zero conveners, drafters have had the proposals that you've made. So thank you very much. Now it's my pleasure to open up this conversation to over the 44 people that are signed up for these conversations to also share their insights, their experiences, and most importantly, make their bold and transformative proposals that are going to shape the manifesto. I can't see the question and answer icon, but I don't know if there were questions that were already being posted or proposals, but I'll request my colleagues to support. So anyone who would like to speak?
There's a Wanja who wants to speak. Eunice, her hand is up.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Wanja, over to you.
Hello, Eunice, and hello to all members. The panel was very, very informative. I was particularly happy to hear from Honorable Nyokabi, considering that she was speaking into local context that I know only too well. My question is to any of the three discussants, and I wish to ask, now that we are not faring well across the region, how do you see the role of male engagement, a positive role, or what are your views about male engagement in ensuring that more women are elected into political positions? And do you think it's a formula that can work, considering that other formulas seem not to be working? Generally, your reflections on the issue of male engagement and male allyship. Thank you.
Thank you, Wanja. That's an important perspective to bring into the conversation. I see Maureen Gichana. Maureen Gichana, and then we'll go to Aicha. So we'll start with Maureen. Maureen Gichana. Can we hear you? Are you able to speak? If not, Maureen, Sylvia, are you able to speak? Sylvia, are you able to speak? Are you able to unmute and speak? Aicha, are you able to speak? I don't know why the participants are struggling to speak. Movezi?
I have permitted them to speak, so if you can just unmute your mic. I'm seeing the hands, and each hand I see, I unmute. So Sylvia, you're able to speak. Aisha, you're able to speak. As long as you see a mic, you're able to speak. Sylvia, you can unmute and try.
Hello, everyone. This is Maureen from Kenya. This is Maureen Gishana. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, Maureen. Please go right ahead.
Yes. I want to commend all the presenters for what they have for the presentation for today's afternoon. And my contribution really is to what all the panelists have touched on, especially on leveling the playing field from the start, from the nomination. And I think for us to propose maybe a legislation or a policy on how to level the playing field through enhancing election campaign financing, then we'll be able to have more women coming on board. We also need to look into political parties and the policies that they have to ensure that they are 2/3 compliance, and that the funds that they receive from, from the public, that is through the political parties fund, are applied equally across all candidates, including the youth and PWDs, of course, inclusive of women. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Those are very clear proposals. Over to you, Sylvia Briggs. Sylvia, are you able to speak now? I don't know what's happening. Michame, are you able to speak?
I have unmuted everyone. Is there someone who is struggling with their mic? Tabitha, you can
Good
speak. You're
afternoon,
actually
everyone. I hope
unmuted.
you can hear me.
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
we can.
Yes, thank you very much. This is wonderful. It's a very, very inspiring webinar. And my comment and question is, I think there has been a lot of emphasis on leadership only being at the political level. There's so many, I mean, there can only be so many people appointed as ministers, so many people entering parliament. So we shall just be creating, I mean, a few women who've got power, but I was also thinking that that power can be cascaded downwards, that we also try as much as possible to inspire leadership and make sure that women are also mentored into vying for leadership in all other aspects of the economy, so that we don't only focus on political leadership. Leadership can also be leadership at an institution, leadership at the community level, and so on. And this kind of leadership that is homegrown, that is grassroots grown, can also rise to political leadership. That's the way I see it. And I don't know, but I'm just thinking that we also cascade this kind of power and leadership downwards. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabitha. Your point is well noted and appreciated. Your point is well noted and appreciated. We clarified a little bit earlier, the Gap Zero is focusing on women in public leadership. And I know that all these other spaces in the pipeline for leadership. But for this conversation, we really wanted to really focus on that cohort of leaders that we need to unlock or move the needle along. But there are so many other actors that do focus on the other spheres of leadership that are equally important, as you say. Sylvia Briggs, are you able to come in?
Yeah, I'm already in.
Yes, please.
Mine borders on the challenges being faced in Nigeria. It might not be peculiar to other places. Ours borders on access to influential network, both for appointive and elective position. If we don't have access, like most people who have the leadership potential, leadership capacity, ability, and competencies to be in that position are excluded from the process because of lack of access to influential network. Talking about the influential network, here the influential network is not really based on competence, it's based on your ability, the ability to match violence for violence. And the women we are talking about, the women with women with leadership ability, competence, and whatever it takes to be an effective leader, they are there, they're on ground, but they are not highlighted one, and they don't have what it takes, not technically or by way of competence, but by way of what is required, the violence, the ability to match violence for violence, to emerge as a leader. If you don't have access to that network or people who can highlight you, that is the network of people who can match violence for violence and highlight you as a leader, whether or not you have the leadership capability or not, you cannot be there. So that is one thing. They are there, not that they are not there. We have capable, prospective leaders, women leaders with competence, prospective leaders with competence. But how can they come out? They don't belong to the network.
Thank you.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah, if you could wrap up your proposal, please.
My proposal is I'm proposing for independent candidacy so that without political party influence, this people can come out and we know them and vote for them. But with this, when they are coming through political party, it's difficult because even they can't scale through the primaries because of lack of access to political influencers. So if they can come out on their own without the influence of political parties, it will be better. We'll have influential, we have women with the competence, credible and competent women in position of leadership. with this quota system that they are trying to pass into law, I don't think this will have enough women in leadership position, but that will not really solve our problem, because the type of women that should be in that position may be excluded, because the same political parties we are talking about that will still nominate these people to field women in the reserve seat. So how do we have those women? Those women are there, but they don't have access to those people that will nominate them or appoint them. So when we can advocate for independence, and when they come out, we can vote for them massively.
Thank you.
To do the needful.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sylvia, for joining us all the way from Nigeria. I will also encourage you that when we do share the link for the West African conversation, that you do join once again and give us the nuances from the Nigerian space, especially because the percentage of women in leadership in Nigeria is still quite low, one of the lowest in Africa. So we're looking to unlock that. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'll now pass the baton to Aicha. I hope I'm not murdering your name. I'm sorry. Mohammed. Aicha Mohammed, are you able to speak? Aicha?
There's one woman there.
Hi, I'm not sure you're talking about me. Is it me?
Yes, please. Please go ahead.
Oh, actually, I did not raise my hand. I'm just here listening.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I think
We have Harriet. Can we mute Sylvia? We have Harriet Akello with her hands raised.
Oh, okay. Harriet, please go ahead.
And then Jane Ngobi.
Harriet, Jean, maybe Jean, you can go as we wait for Harriet to be given.
Thank you so much, Eunice, and thank you, the presenters, for really opening our mind to look very deeply on the issues that are very critical to expand the space for women to operate. Now, just an addition to what the panelists have just mentioned is the issue of environment. The environment that is needed for civil society actors to be able to contribute towards increasing the numbers of women and also advocating for enabling policies, the environment that enables women in their different political ecosystem to be able to engage and also be in position to contribute meaningfully. I want to comment on the issue around the poly crisis and the growing anti-rights movements that are really very, very common and increasing every time throughout Africa, and specifically for East Africa, that have stifled the environment that could be possible for civic action to take shape, for civil society to act, for political actors to be able to engage in a way that there are a lot of repressive laws that have been created, in a way that there's backlash also on women's gender and women's rights engagements, and that leading to a controlled but also diminishing funding landscape for development work, especially for gender rights work. I also want to speak to how limited the space is becoming.
I'm going to ask you to make very clear proposals so that we give opportunity to others as well.
Thank you. So my proposals here is really to ensure that we are working in a collaboration. We are strengthening the movement between the civic and political actors so that we can engage meaningfully and address the constraints that are in the environment, and also ensure that we are addressing the growing backlash against gender and women's rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. You make a very important point about strengthening the collaboration between the women's movement and political women actors, which worked well previously, but now there's a huge disconnect. I do not see the next hand up. Can I be supported? I don't see the hands. I'm not seeing the hands.
There's Evelyn.
Evelyn or Doda.
Evelyn, please go.
Thank you so much, and allow me to appreciate the panelists for the good presentation. So mine is just looking on the issues around the mental health support, because for a very long time we've had our women leaders undergo a lot of stress, especially during the electioneering periods, even when they're in power. A lot of incitement from the other counterparts and even from other colleagues. And so how do we come in to support women leaders undergo some psychosocial counseling and support? That's like a therapy to actually support them overcome these issues of mental health trauma. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. That's really pertinent, something that had not emerged in the conversation thus far. So thank you for highlighting that. Looking at that time, I'm going to ask for the final 2 or 3 conversationists that can speak bold and transformative reforms that are needed. And then I'll pass back the mic to the panelists to wrap up with their final thoughts. And then we'll be able to close this meeting. And please also, you can use that chat to share any proposals you have that the Gap Zero Manifesto needs to take into consideration. Please use the chat so that we together as a collective, as a movement, we can have a very bold and transformative process that will accelerate the progress that we are looking for. Any other hands up? Can I be supported?
Ines, we're seeing none. I think it's a legacy hand from Harriet, who has not been responsive. So I think we're fine.
Oh, okay, great.
Eunice, there's a question. How do we see the role of, the role of male engagement in ensuring more women are elected? This was mentioned earlier.
Yes, it was captured.
Okay.
Yes. So thank you so much. And if there are any final thoughts from the participants, please post them in the chat group. Otherwise, I'm going to pass on the baton to the panelists, and I'm going to start with, we'll start where we ended. I'm going to start with Georgia. Then we will have Honorable, and then we will close off with Dr. Victoria. So 1 minute each. Your final thoughts. And if anyone wants to respond to the question on male engagement, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Eunice, for being such an amazing, prolific moderator. I will answer the question on male engagement. We have seen it work at the Forum for Women in Democracy, because while we pursue gender equality, we also work with men to nurture democratic space for women, because without the spaces being okay at working with men, then it would be very hard to even have men supporting women in leadership. And so we continue to work with them to nurture democratic space, but also when I was talking earlier about incubation and having feminists ready to govern bills, I talked about working with allies. So allies can be from all spheres, from entrepreneurship, from parliament. These are the male allies that would be working with. And very, very finally, okay, again, with male engagement, we need to make sure that then they do not end up being the advocates, because women have their own lived experiences and therefore have their own voice. And so working even with the male engagement model needs a lot of, you need to be careful to ensure that then women are not further silenced even in those advocacy spaces. Finally, for me, I'm hoping that the Gap Zero Manifesto is going to be a blueprint for the new world that we aspire to have. Thank you very much and have a lovely evening or morning wherever you are.
Thank you so much. I like the proposals of what the Gap Zero could be, a blueprint, a campus, a feminist utopia, all this and more. Thank you. So over to you, Honorable.
Thank you very much. Let me also just be very quick on Wanja's question around male allies, especially on 2 points. One is political party leadership is still male-oriented. Presidential candidates are still male. So when we talk about, for example, the opposite gender rule, gubernatorial and presidential elections, we are talking about male allies, male political party leaders accepting to champion gender quotas and gender parity in their parties. And so we need men at that level. The other one is men as custodians of retrogressive culture. GBV and FGM are actually male supported. The reason why they continue to pervade in the society is because the men are supporting them. Men as elders, men as cultural elders. And so we need some of these allies to end those retrogressive practices. And I just have a quick point. I will ask that you give me 1 more minute because I forgot to give my points on the Gap Zero Manifesto.
Yes, please.
And I had really prepared on it.
I meant to give you 3 minutes on that because you did present.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me do that very quickly. And I agree on the gender parity for the Gap Zero Manifesto. I think the manifesto should not give us the 30% or 2/3. Let it just go for the full, and I agree with my fellow panelists. Let's go for full gender parity, complete with gender audits. What are the women doing in those rooms? But then the reason I want the gender parity is because of the AU Agenda 2063. The African heads of states and governments have already committed themselves to gender parity. So let us not move any lower. They've already committed. Let's push Africa to Agenda 2063 and let the GAP Manifesto be an implementation document. Let it not promise. Let it now give us the how-to, the practical how-to. How are we going to implement the Maputo Protocol? How are we going to implement all these instruments, including the recent one on GBV? How are we going to implement? That's what the manifesto should speak to. And then the second one is the party level quotas. And I agree with Sylvia on the quotas. The quotas are the floor. They are not the ceiling. The ceiling is gender parity. The 2/3 quotas and 30% are just the minimum. And we must get a minimum threshold and a minimum legal standard. And so the party level, and I agree also with my panelists on the party level. Let us now focus on the party level quotas, the party level implementation, the party level systems, the party level leveling, like what Maureen was speaking about. What do we do at the party level? And then third, the legal reforms. We still need a lot of legal reforms within Africa. You've seen the sort of inconsistency. What is happening in Burundi is not happening in Tanzania. So the Pan-African movement and sort of common standards within Africa and also legal reforms, that these are prescriptive laws. We have learned a painful lesson in Kenya. Saying 2/3 is just saying 2/3. You must prescribe how the 2/3 is going to be done. And if you don't do it 15 years after, we are still here looking for the prescription. So let the manifesto now come with common legal reforms, campaign financing, the laws that we need. And then for me, number 4 is young women. Again, this conversation in Africa is leaving out young women. Even when you speak about women, where are the quotas for the younger women? Where is the purple zebra? Other than the zebra list is also the purple zebra, an old woman followed by a young woman, so that we are speaking about the young women in this conversation as well. And then the electoral colleges. Let the youth, let the persons with disability, the intersectionality, let the different groups elect their own representatives. We are also learning painful lessons in Kenya around some of this. Everybody is young at heart. Even when the seats are reserved for young women, everybody is a young Turk, everybody is young at heart, everybody understands the youth, and then the young women are missing out on the positions. And then lastly, and I agree on the electoral systems in Africa, the charters on electoral governance. As long as we don't have proper credible elections, we are not going to have women elected. So we must start with reforming the electoral systems, technology in the electoral systems, electoral dispute resolution management, electoral management bodies. We really must go after proper elections in Africa so that women are then the product of proper electoral systems. Thank you very much, and we look forward to the manifesto, and we look forward to more conversations and the regional ones as well. Thank you so much, and all the best to the organizers, and to more women in power and more women transforming our continent. That's what we are still looking for, not just the numbers, is quality and quantity. Both are important.
Thank you. Thank you. More women in power and more women transforming our continent. Thank you very much. And finally, and not least, Dr. Victoria, your final thoughts.
Thank you very much. For me, the manifesto has to really tackle the real problem, and that is, as I said earlier on, it should really unpack the thing called electoral system. It is the system that really governs how elections are conducted, and there are a number of lessons we can learn from countries that are applying different forms of electoral system and what it means for women. So if I was just to focus on one thing that I could really study and come up with concrete recommendations for the manifesto, Gap Zero manifesto, it will be really women now deep diving into the electoral system, because there is the science of how the elections are conducted. Everything, quota, whatever, those are just add-ons, but the game changer is at addressing the challenges around the electoral system and adopting the electoral system that can really be transformative. I was in Sierra Leone for the elections observation during their last elections, and they had just moved from first past the post electoral system to proportional representation, and the number of women jumped from 12% to 33%, just because they changed the electoral system. So there is science around the electoral system, and there's a reason why most of the African countries are holding into the first past the post, because it works for them without going into the root cause of how the elections are conducted, and that is the electoral system, proportional representation versus first past the post, the advantages, the disadvantages, who wins, who loses. We cannot move a needle. We'll be just addressing the peripherals of the problem, but the heartbeat of the problem is in the electoral system. And again, I think recently, much of my interest is on gendered violence in elections and in politics. We should also look into that, because it's really a big problem that comes to add into a challenge that is already very complex. So looking again into the violence against women in politics and elections, and also technology facilitated violence, that's also something that this manifesto should really look at. Finally, this thing called party caucus. In any parliament, there's what is called party caucus. So it doesn't matter, you're a female parliamentarian, you're a male parliamentarian. What your party wants, the party position is your position. It doesn't matter whether you came with a women manifesto from Amwa and Ellen Sirleaf. It doesn't matter. It is the party. It's the party stand that matters. So this whip system also needs to be looked at, because really, no matter the level of mentorship we can do, if what flies is the party stand on a particular policy issue, then we still need critical work to do. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Victoria. That's a good point to note. The party politics always supersede everything else, and we've seen that play out in so many spaces. So we'll continue to see how women also become influential within political parties. But then Georgia told us we should first burn down these political parties and have alternatives that are not these political parties, so that the influence is coming from elsewhere. Thank you very much. This has been such an enriching conversation. I have seen from the chat people saying, I feel fired up, I feel energized, I feel hopeful that we can actually move the needle on women's political participation. And once we do, will also move the needle on all other spheres of leadership as well. So I'm going to invite Michelle. Would you like to close us off? I see that we have 3 minutes to close off this webinar. Maybe it's close us off, give your thoughts, give your thanks, and send us off. Michelle?
Yes, thank you very much, Eunice. Thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you so much to our listeners and to all the contributors. I have been writing. I have gotten a lot of insight, and I like what the panelists have shared. And I would like to summarize some of the quotes that I'm leaving with. Georgia told us that tokenism is cheap, real power is funded. And Dr. Victoria has told us that that we need to invest in addressing the electoral system issues. She spoke about proportional representation and the quotas. And it's very clear that even as we engage with the women leaders, even as we invest in strengthening their capacities, it's important for us to address the systemic issues. And I also glad that Honorable Nyokabi also painted a picture of where we are at in Kenya, the challenges we are having with the two-thirds gender rule in Kenya. We always say we make 2 steps forward and 2 steps backward. When it's convenient, that's when you see all of us running to try and address the 2/3 issue. And we've been told very clearly that if you want to have the quota system in place, we need to be very specific on what we want. And that is the challenge we've been having in Kenya. So at this juncture, looking at the time, I want to appreciate all the speakers and everyone who was able to tune in to share your thoughts. Special thanks to our partners, the Ellen Johnson Presidential Center, Make Every Woman Count, my colleagues, everyone who made this event a success, and not forgetting our panelists and colleagues who were tuned in. So very special thanks to all of you. And I believe we will continue to build on this momentum as we work towards advancing a gender equal world of Africa. So thank you very much, and over to you, Eunice.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I too have picked so many quotable quotes that I'm sure we can use even as we color the Gap Zero Manifesto. So thank you so much. As you've said to everyone, we'll now end it here, and we will be announcing the dates for the next consultation, which is going to be West Africa. Thank you. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Eunice. Thank you, everyone.
You. Beautiful session.
Thank you.